She only showed up because there's money involved. That's the kind of person she's always been. My aunt said it loud enough for the whole waiting room to hear. Not whispering, not muttering. Full voice, the way people speak when they want an audience and aren't ashamed of it. The receptionist behind the front desk looked up from her keyboard. A man in a gray blazer near the window shifted uncomfortably in his seat. My mother didn't correct her. She just smoothed the front of her coat and looked at the floor. I didn't say anything. I just stood there near the door of Hendricks and Moore Law Office in Calvert Springs, Kentucky, holding a manila folder against my side, staring at the framed print of a covered bridge on the opposite wall. My hands were steady. My breathing was steady. I had learned to keep both that way a long time ago. My uncle cleared his throat and looked at his watch. My cousin pretended to scroll through her phone. And then the office door opened, and the attorney called us all inside. But that moment didn't arrive without everything that came before it. And everything that came before it started 7 years ago, in the same small town, on the same kind of cold October morning. I had left Calvert Springs the week after my 24th birthday. Not with a big scene, not with a slammed door. I packed 2 duffel bags before sunrise, wrote a note that said, "Only I'll be in touch," and drove my old Civic toward the highway while the rest of the town was still asleep. I had already signed the enlistment papers. The recruiter's office in Lexington was expecting me by 9. I didn't tell my family. That was the hardest part. Not the leaving, the not telling. My father had spent the better part of 3 years making it clear that I had no direction. My older brother had graduated from the University of Kentucky with an accounting degree and gone to work at a firm in Louisville. My younger sister had married at 22 and was already expecting her first child. I was the middle one, the one who had changed her major twice, who had worked a series of jobs that didn't go anywhere, who had, according to my aunt at one particular Easter dinner, a talent for starting things she never finishes. I didn't argue with any of it, not because they were right, but because I had already made my decision, and no argument was going to change it. I just hadn't told them yet. The Air Force changed me in ways I still don't have clean language for. Basic was hard in the physical sense, but simple in the emotional one. Everything was structured. Everything had a purpose, and for the first time in my adult life, I stopped questioning whether I was capable of something before I tried it. I went into the medical pipeline, became a flight nurse, spent 4 years stationed in Germany, then 2 more at a base in Japan. I deployed 3 times. I flew on helicopters in weather that would make a reasonable person want to stay on the ground forever. I held people together, sometimes literally, in the back of an aircraft while the crew chief shouted altitudes at me and the patient's vitals did things that shouldn't be possible and somehow were. I loved it, not in a way I could have explained to my family, but in the kind of quiet, bone-deep way that makes you understand what you're actually made of. I called home when I could. My mother and I talked occasionally. My father less so. The conversations were polite and short, the kind where both people are mostly waiting for a comfortable place to hang up. I sent cards on birthdays. I sent a little money when I could, which my mother accepted, and my father, I suspected, pretended not to know about. Then, about 3 months before I came back to Calvert Springs, my grandfather passed away. He had been the one steady thing in my family. He ran a small machine shop on the edge of town for 40 years. He never spoke much, but when he did, it was worth listening to. When I was 15 and told him I didn't know what I was supposed to be good at, he handed me a socket wrench and said, "Start with what's in front of you." He came to my high school graduation and shook my hand like I had done something real. He was the only person in my family who never looked at me with that low-grade disappointment in his eyes. He left the machine shop to me. The building, the tools, the small parcel of land it sat on. According to the attorney, the will was straightforward and recently updated. My grandfather had been clear. My father called me 2 days after I got the news. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. He said the shop should stay in the family, meaning, I assumed, that it should go to him or my brother. I told him I understood he was upset. He told me I didn't understand anything. We didn't speak after that. 3 weeks later, I drove back to Calvert Springs. The town looked exactly the way small towns always look when you've been gone long enough, smaller than memory but more familiar than you expected. The diner on Route 9 still had the same sign. The hardware store had a new coat of paint. I recognized 2 people in the parking lot of the grocery store before I even parked. They recognized me too, I could tell, but neither of them waved right away. They waited to see what I was going to do first. I rented a room above the Calvert Inn, a place my grandfather used to call the nicest building in town that isn't actually nice. The owner, Mrs. Caldecott, gave me a key and a look that suggested she had already heard I was back and why. "Family meeting tomorrow?" she asked carefully. "At the attorney's office," I said. She nodded once. "You holding up okay?" "I'm fine," I told her. And I was. Tired, maybe, but fine. The evening before the meeting, I sat at the small desk in my room with my grandfather's letters spread in front of me. He had sent them over the years, short notes, usually a single page, always handwritten. He never said much about feelings directly. He asked about my work. He described the weather. Once, near the end, he wrote, "I always knew you'd land somewhere that suited you. I'm sorry I never said that sooner." I folded that one carefully and put it in the inside pocket of my jacket. The next morning was gray and cold. November in Kentucky has a way of settling into your bones before you're ready for it. I arrived at the law office 10 minutes early. My father was already there with my mother and my aunt, who had driven up from Bowling Green the night before, specifically, I suspected, to provide additional weight to their side of things. My uncle and cousin arrived shortly after me. My brother sent a message the night before saying he couldn't make it. Work commitment. Whether that was true or whether he simply didn't want to be in the room, I couldn't say. No one hugged me. My mother looked at me briefly and then at the floor. My father gave me a single nod, the kind that is not warm but is technically acknowledgement. My aunt did not look at me at all until she made her announcement about why I had showed up, loud enough for everyone in the waiting room to hear. I kept my hands steady and stared at the covered bridge print and said nothing. Inside the attorney's office, we arranged ourselves on opposite sides of a long table. My father and mother and aunt on one side, me on the other. The attorney, a man named Douglas Garner, was in his late 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the composed expression of someone who had spent decades watching families disagree over things that were never really about what they said they were about. He reviewed the will. He read the relevant sections clearly and without editorializing. The shop and the land went to me. There was a small amount of cash divided among several family members. Personal items had already been distributed according to a separate document my grandfather had left with the family months before he passed. My aunt's voice was the first one raised. "This is wrong," she said. Not to the attorney exactly, but to the room. Harold would not have wanted that shop sitting empty while she's off doing whatever it is she does. "I'm right here," I said quietly. She turned toward me for the first time. "I know you're here." I just said I know why. My father leaned forward with his palms flat on the table. "The shop has been in this family since 1974, he said, his voice controlled but tight underneath. "Your grandfather built that from nothing. He worked 40 years in that building." "I know," I said. "He told me." "Oh, you had a lot of conversations?" my aunt said sharply. "Strange, because he never mentioned yours. That was between him and me." My mother finally spoke, and her voice had that quality I recognized from childhood, not angry exactly, but resigned, as though she had already grieved for something she was still losing. "Sarah," she said, "what are you going to do with a machine shop? You don't even live here." "I haven't decided yet." "You haven't decided," my aunt repeated, and her tone made it into something ugly. "Right. Because that's always been the issue, hasn't it? You never decide. You just drift." I kept my voice flat. "I enlisted in the Air Force at 24 and served for 6 years. That's not exactly drifting." A brief silence. My father's eyes narrowed slightly. "You were in the military?" "Yes. You never told us that." I told Mom. My mother looked startled. You mentioned something once. I didn't know it was you. Didn't tell us you were actually enlisted," I said. 6 years. Flight nursing. I got out 18 months ago." My aunt shook her head like she was brushing it off. "Well, that doesn't have anything to do with the shop." "I'm not saying it does." Douglas Garner had been quiet through all of this, reviewing documents with careful patience. He now looked up over his reading glasses at me. He had been studying something in my file for the past few minutes. I had submitted my discharge papers and identification when I arrived, as the will required for verification purposes. He set his pen down slowly. "Miss Brennan," he said. His voice had changed slightly. Not warmer exactly, but more deliberate. Before we continue, I want to confirm something for the record. He turned one of the pages in my file toward him and read quietly for a moment. Then he looked up at my family. Are you all aware of your daughter's service record? My father frowned. What about it? Garner folded his hands on the table. Your daughter served 6 years in the United States Air Force as a flight nurse. She completed 3 overseas deployments. He paused. She also received the Air Medal. That's awarded for meritorious achievement during aerial flight. He looked at me. Among other things, the room was very quiet. My aunt opened her mouth and then closed it. My father stared at the attorney, then at me. His jaw moved once without producing sound. My mother had gone very still beside him. Garner continued in the same measured tone. I mention this not because it changes the legal standing of the will, which is clear, but because several statements have been made this morning about your daughter's character and reliability, and I think context is relevant. He looked at my father directly. She has also been working with the Veterans Administration in Louisville for the past year, assisting with patient advocacy for returning service members. My uncle, who had not said a single word since we sat down, exhaled quietly through his nose and looked at his hands. My father turned toward me slowly. The tightness around his jaw was different now. Not angry exactly. Something else. Something that looks like anger when it isn't. You were a flight nurse, he said. Yes. On helicopters. Mostly. Some fixed wing. He was quiet for a moment. In combat zones? 2 of the 3 deployments, yes. My mother pressed 2 fingers against her mouth. Her eyes had gotten bright. My aunt said nothing at all. For the first time since I had arrived in Calvert Springs, she looked like she didn't know what to do with her hands. The rest of the meeting was brief. Garner walked through the remaining documentation, had everything signed, answered 2 procedural questions from my father's side in a tone that remained completely professional. When it was over, he shook my hand last and held it a moment longer than necessary. Your grandfather talked about you sometimes, he said quietly, low enough that the others were already gathering their things and didn't hear. He was proud of you. He told me once that you were the toughest person he'd ever raised, and that nobody in the family knew it yet. I thanked him. My voice was steady. I waited until I was outside in the parking lot before I let myself breathe all the way out. The walk back to the inn was only 4 blocks. I took them slowly, hands in my jacket pockets, the cold air doing something useful to the feeling sitting in my chest that didn't have a clean name yet. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't even relief. It was something closer to the way a weight feels when you've been carrying it long enough that you forget about it, and then someone finally acknowledges it, and suddenly you feel how heavy it was. A car slowed beside me on the street. My father's. He pulled to the curb and rolled down the window. He didn't say anything for a second, just looked at me the way people look at something they're trying to see properly after years of viewing it at the wrong angle. You need a ride? He asked. I'm only going 4 blocks. It's cold. I got in the car. We drove the 4 blocks without talking. He didn't pull away from the inn right away. He put it in park and left the engine running and looked at the building in front of us like it was the most interesting thing he'd ever seen. 3 deployments, he said finally. Yes. Were you? He stopped. Tried again. Was it dangerous? Some of it. He rubbed the side of his thumb along the steering wheel. It was the same motion I had watched him make my whole childhood when he was thinking hard about something and didn't want to show it. I didn't know, he said. I know you didn't. I should have asked. I looked at him. He wasn't looking at me. He was still looking at the building, but his jaw had that quality it gets when he's working on saying something that doesn't come easily. I thought I was asking the right questions, he said. I thought I was being practical. You seemed to be. We didn't know where you were, what you were doing. Your mother worried. He paused. I worried. You had a strange way of showing it. He let out a short breath that might have been a laugh if it weren't also something else. Yeah, I know. The heater ran quietly between us. Your grandfather knew? He asked. He guessed. About a year in, I told him. He asked me not to make a big thing of it with the rest of you. Why? I thought about how to say it. Because he knew how you'd react, and he didn't want me to have to manage that from whatever base I was on. My father nodded slowly. That landed on him. I could see it. I'm sorry, he said. It came out smaller than it probably sounded in his head, but it was real. I could tell the difference between a real one and a practiced one. He had given me too few of both over the years for me to mistake them. I know, I said. I got out of the car. I stood on the curb for a moment and looked back at him through the open door. "I'm going to try to be in town a few more days," I said. "If Mom wants to get coffee or something." He nodded. He looked like he might say something more, but he didn't. He just nodded. Sometimes that's the version of a person you get, and you learn to take it. I went inside. My mother called my cell phone an hour later. Her voice was different from the morning quieter, softer around the edges in the way voices get when something has been let go of. "I want to apologize," she said. "For this morning. For I should have stopped her. It's all right. It isn't, actually." A pause. "You were overseas, 3 times, and I was here telling people I didn't know what you were up to. You didn't have all the information. I should have asked for it." She was quiet for a moment. "Can I take you to dinner tonight? Just the 2 of us, if you're willing." I told her yes. We met at the diner on Route 9, the one with the same sign, the same booths, the same smell of coffee and fry oil that hadn't changed in 20 years. We sat across from each other and ordered soup and didn't look at the menus because neither of us needed them. For a while we just talked around things, the town, the diner, whether the soup was as good as it used to be. But my mother has never really been someone who circles forever. She got to it. "I want to understand," she said, "why you didn't tell us, really tell us." I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug, because every time we talked before I left, it turned into an argument about what I was doing wrong. I was tired of defending myself before I had done anything yet. I needed to go do something first. She was quiet for a moment. And then I had done it. And I didn't need you to validate it anymore. It was just mine. She looked at me for a long time. "I think I understand that," she said slowly. "I don't think I like it, but I think I understand it. You don't have to like it." "No." She folded her napkin in her lap. I missed you. All those years." I didn't know how to say that without it coming out like blame. Most of the time it did come out like blame. She smiled slightly. A sad one. "I know. Your aunt is worse about it than I am. But I let her speak for me too many times. She's not my favorite person." My mother laughed quietly at that, the real kind, the one she mostly kept hidden when my father and my aunt were around. It sounded like the person she was before everything got complicated, and I had forgotten how much I missed hearing it. We stayed at that diner for 2 hours. We talked about things we hadn't talked about in years, about what she was reading, about a trip she wanted to take someday, about my grandfather and the machine shop and the way he used to eat lunch there every Friday without fail. We talked about deployment in the way you can when the other person is finally listening instead of waiting to respond. When we left, she hugged me in the parking lot. A real one, both arms, the kind that means something. "Are you going to keep the shop?" she asked when she let go. "I think so. I haven't figured out what to do with it yet, but it feels wrong to sell it." She nodded. He would have liked that. I drove back to the inn with the heater running and the dark fields going by on either side of the road, the town blinking quietly behind me. I thought about the note my grandfather had written. "I always knew you'd land somewhere that suited you." I had landed somewhere. Several somewheres, actually. None of them were what my family had expected or what the town had imagined or what my aunt had scripted for me in the version of my life she apparently carried around in her head. But they were mine. 2 days later, I went to the shop. My father was already there when I arrived. His truck was parked in the gravel lot, the tailgate down. I found him inside, standing in the middle of the floor with his hands in his coat pockets, looking at the equipment the way you look at something that belongs to a person who is no longer in it. I stood beside him. The shop smelled like machine oil and cold concrete and something else underneath it, something I couldn't name exactly, but that I associated with my grandfather in a way that made my chest do something involuntary. "Some of these machines are older than you are," my father said. "I know. He kept them running, though. He knew how. He tried to teach me once. I was about 15. My father looked at me sideways. Did any of it stick? Some of it. He almost smiled. Not quite, but close enough that I could see the shape of it. We stood there for a while without talking. After a bit, my father walked over to a workbench along the far wall and started looking through the tool drawers the way people do when they're thinking about something else. "I told your brother," he said without looking up. "About what?" "About you. The service. All of it." He pulled out a socket wrench and turned it over in his hand. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he wished he'd known. "Maybe someday I'll tell him in person. I think he'd like that." He set the wrench down and turned to face me. I'm not good at this. You know that. Your mother is better at it than I am. I know, but I want to try. He looked at the floor for a moment, then back at me. If you're willing. I thought about all the years, the arguments, the word disappointment hanging between us, never spoken directly but always present, the way weather is present even when you're inside. I thought about how easy it would be to hold on to it, and how heavy holding on to it had always been, and how I had spent 6 years learning to put weight down when it stopped being useful. I'm willing, I said. He nodded once. Then he picked up a flashlight from the bench and turned toward the back of the shop. Come on. Let me show you what he was working on back here before he got sick. There's a lathe that needs a new belt. I think I know where he kept the spares. I followed him. We spent 3 hours in that shop. My father showed me things I didn't know. I showed him things I did. At some point, my mother arrived with sandwiches, and we sat on 3 stools near the workbench and ate without ceremony. And the conversation was ordinary, the best kind of ordinary, the kind you don't realize you've been starving for until you're in the middle of it. Before they left that afternoon, my father paused in the doorway of the shop and looked back at me. You going to be okay out here alone tonight? He asked. I'm used to a lot worse than a cold shop in Kentucky, I told him. He was quiet for a moment. I believe you, he said. And the way he said it was different from any version of that sentence I had heard from him before, like he meant it about more than the cold. I locked up the shop after dark and walked to my car in the gravel lot, my breath making small clouds in the November air. The town was quiet around me. The lights of the main street were visible a half-mile away, and beyond that, nothing but fields and the dark. My grandmother used to say that the hardest thing isn't walking away. It's deciding to come back, and then deciding what to rebuild when you get there. I hadn't figured all of it out yet. The shop needed work. My family needed time. So did I. Trust doesn't rebuild in an afternoon over sandwiches and socket wrenches. It rebuilds the way most things do, slowly, with effort, and without any guarantee of what it'll look like when it's done. But I had come back. And they had stayed in the room, and my father had handed me a tool and said, I believe you. For now, that was enough to start with. If this story reminds you of someone you've been quiet with for too long, a parent, a child, a sibling, maybe it's time to stop waiting for the right moment. The right moment is usually just the next one you're both still in. We'll have more stories like this one, because the quietest people are almost always carrying the most, and they deserve to be seen.